On today's episode, we interview a priest of the Archdiocese of Louisville who was a seminarian in Rome at the time of the Second Vatican Council, Father Joe Merkt, on Spirit Inspire, starting right now.
Broadcasting from the Cathedral of the Assumption in Louisville, Kentucky, this is Spirit Inspire. And now, here is your host.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Spirit Inspire. I'm your host today, John Soul, and joined with me is our co-host, Vincent Ricketts. He's on the switch today, and we have a great set back there behind him. So, hi, Vincent.
Hello.
And today we also have a special guest, Father Joe Merkt. He's been in the church for many years, serving in different capacities. He even worked with my grandma many years ago in the Catholic education system in the Archdiocese of Louisville, and he's always been a very important name in my life growing up. So it's truly, I think, a gift of divine providence that God brought us together in the last couple weeks. I was giving a workshop at St. Peter the Apostle, and you were there, and we had a short exchange, and you had to head home, and then within a week, a friend of mine mentioned you as a potential guest for our podcast, and I was like, I literally just saw him 3 days ago. So I mean, that's to me how the Holy Spirit works, right? So Father, thank you for being with us today.
It's an honor. I really do appreciate the opportunity. It has been a privilege to be in conversation with you all, even getting things ready for this session.
Yeah, absolutely. So one question I have for you, Father, that we always like to start with anyone that comes on the show is simply, what has your personal faith journey looked like? Because we want anyone viewing these episodes to really get a sense of your heart. Where are you coming from? What has inspired you? What brought conversion in your life? And how has Jesus Christ been a central part of everything you do? And what does that look like in your life?
I think you just asked me about 20 different questions.
Right. Yes, there are many different layers to those questions.
That's how it goes when you talk to John.
That is very true. I do ask a lot of questions in varying different ways.
There's so many different ways to answer that.
Mm-hmm.
The faith journey that touched me through the years has had many different settings. But I think in the beginning, it really was being a member of the school community of St. Francis of Assisi Parish, and the talks that were given to us by missionaries, sisters, priests, and brothers, who the pastor invited periodically to come and talk to us about their lives when they were coming home from the missions to visit their families.
So you grew up at St. Francis of Assisi?
And went to school there.
Really? That's where my brother and his wife go.
Okay.
Matt and Alyssa Soul. And the Frohmeyer, Steve Frohmeyer, the principal there today, is my brother's father-in-law. So isn't that amazing?
Yeah. And I've been in resident there for the last 30 years.
Wow.
So it's been a wonderful parish and very helpful for me. It was three of my classmates in grade school, 8th grade in particular, Gloria Schuler, Michelle Payton, and Barbara Parker, who suggested to me that I consider becoming a priest.
In 8th grade?
8th grade. And they were very supportive. I went to St. X for a while and then went to the seminary. And
right out of high school?
Before high school, my seminary education started as a sophomore.
Wow. 15, 16 years old.
Yeah.
You can't You can't do that anymore, can you?
They don't even allow it anymore. It's a different world. Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And we had a marvelous class, and it has done some marvelous things for this diocese. Only a few of us got ordained. Father Nick Rice and Father Don Springman currently are the only two classmates who are priests who are alive at this time.
What year were you ordained?
1966.
Wow.
Class of 1967. And was ordained in Rome.
In 1966? Wow.
December 1966.
That's beautiful.
So it goes back quite a while.
Yes.
And the journey there, of course, was very inspiring because at the time I was there, Vatican II was happening. And one of the things that I noted that every morning they met in the fall semester for 4 years, and every morning is when they had their sessions. And
so wait, when you say you were ordained in Rome, were you ordained by the Pope?
no.
Oh, okay.
But the Pope had an audience with us and our families. We were ordained on Saturday, said our first masses on on Sunday. Mine was at the Zavarian Brothers headquarters in Rome. And then on Monday, we had an audience with the Pope.
Wow.
And our families.
And this was Paul the Sixth?
Paul the Sixth.
Wow.
It was very, very exciting. And my mother had been quite sick, and I didn't know if she was going to be able to come to Rome. My dad said, I'm buying 2 tickets on the airplane, and if you can't do it, I'll fly with an empty seat, but I want it to be there for you. And she came. And after the first Mass, we went the next day on Monday to the audience with the Pope. And there was a huge number of steps that had to be climbed to get to the audience hall where the Pope was going to be meeting us. There were 55 guys in my class, and each one of them had a half dozen family members with them. And my mother was she had been sick, and she was too weak to go up. And so I went over to one of the Swiss guards, and I said, do you have a chair? My mother just can't climb those steps, and she needs a place to sit down and rest. And he looked at me and he said, no chair. And it shocked me, and he said, bring your mother over here. I went, what? So I got my dad and my mom and brought them over to the Swiss guard. And he smiled and very gently said to them, here, let's push this button. Pushed the button behind him. The wall opened up and it had an elevator.
Oh.
Brought her up. She was one of the first parents to get upstairs, was in the first row, was one of the few parents who shook hands with the Pope personally when he came in the door.
Wow. That is miraculous.
That's not how I expected that story to go.
No. Oh, wow.
It was sort of amazing.
Wow.
So anyway, that was a very formative experience that weekend, obviously, my ordination.
Yeah.
But
sounds to me a part of the conversion experience, right? I mean, that's powerful. You never forget that.
the biggest thing, one of the biggest things in the conversion, my own ongoing conversion, was to realize the church ain't just the United States.
Right.
It's a heck of a lot bigger. And it was very interesting. Bishops would get on in buses and taxis, and some of them had cars that were lent to them by people who lived in Rome to drive to St. Peter's for their morning sessions in that council. And Bishop Maloney, our auxiliary bishop from Louisville, was there, and he always came on a bus, and he always came with some very poor bishops from South America and or Africa. They rode the bus together and became friends.
Wow.
And he always wanted to be with the bishops who were from other cultures, but also who were some of the poor in the world, and learn from them and hear their stories. And he had studied in Rome himself, so it wasn't like he wasn't. He was prepared for what happened. And for me, it was quite a shock. Our classroom, first year theology, and each year after that, 60 different nationalities in the same room. Studying together, learning together, talking with each other, and including some seminarians from Germany. We were all seminarians, and they spoke very proper British English that they had learned on BBC, except for one of them. And he had studied in Memphis, Tennessee. And you would not even think that they spoke the same language.
Right.
It's so funny. But anyway.
And this was the 1960s and into the 70s, I guess, at this time. And obviously the church was going through massive change, lots of things. Some good, some chaotic, confusing, and not good, right? How did you sort through that chaotic time? I mean, I remember my grandma would always share the story, like when she was teaching at Holy Family, or then at Guardian Angels in different ways. She said it was like after Vatican II, there was this confusion. You know, she felt that there was this lack of resources that we suddenly didn't have anymore on some level, that she didn't know how to access, right? And she said she went from, pre-Vatican II, which was, Latin Mass and, whatever she had, to it felt like nothing but God is love. And that was like the 60s, right? On some level, culturally.
The 70s.
And the 70s, right?
It was, began in the late 60s and early 70s.
Right. And so she felt this great lack, and she said all I had was things like the Baltimore Catechism or whatever, resources existed at that time to, kind of pull resources from. And I always admired that, because it's like, I can't imagine not having the resources we have today that have been basically on the backs of all the hard work that you all have put in for decades to get things. Because the only reason I think Vatican II even had to happen was because people weren't really being taught their faith effectively. My dad always said it was, because Sister said. You did it because of this. And nobody really knew on the level they, I think, are learning their faith today. And I just wonder, how did you do it when there was so much change going on that many people left the faith?
Well, we made a mistake in the United States. Our newspapers, our Catholic newspapers, for the most part, the Association of Editors of Catholic Newspapers in diocesan newspapers, made the decision not to say too much about the discussions going on in Rome, because they didn't want to scandalize the people. So we were, in a certain sense, almost in a news blackout during the council. And so when the council was over, all of a sudden, it became public. It had to be done. And all of a sudden, the papers were writing about stuff that most Catholics weren't prepared to deal with. I had the privilege of working for 3 years in the U.S. Bishop's press office. And of course, the sessions were in Latin. And even if you knew Latin, when a Frenchman's speaking Latin, it's going to be different than a German speaking Latin, or somebody from Africa speaking Latin. So you needed some translation. And a summary translation was put together that the bishops could look at night. And that was before we had photocopy machines. That was before we had that collated material. And part of my job was helping to sort through the printed mimeograph stuff and staple it together and put it in the bishop's mailboxes. And I saw the evolution as it developed. And just one example of, there was a discussion going on in the council about whether we should continue not to eat meat on Fridays. We always, in the United States and in Europe, it was a fish day. Our fish fries and other things came out of that tradition. The discussion went on in the council for about 3 or 4 days, and the Friday abstinence from meat was really highlighted in one talk after the other talk after the other talk. And then about the middle of the 4th day, a bishop who was British but was serving the church in India and had a diocese in India, stood up, did his presentation, and he spoke very slowly, very deliberately, very clear Latin that was very simple, and almost everybody could understand what he said. And he said, if you want to prove that your church is the wealthy, then go on and pass that legislation you're talking about regarding abstinence on Friday. But I want to tell you, the people in my diocese are so poor, if they get a piece of meat once or twice a week, they're lucky. And if they get meat on Friday, I'm going to tell them to eat it. And if you want to prove that you don't care about people like my people, then go on and put that in the document. Otherwise, how about becoming a church that reaches out to the poor? After he finished his talk, there was a round of applause, and that was the end of that discussion. But then you could have papers outside that were saying, oh, there we go, we're changing another thing, it's a stupid thing. And it was a very conflicted period of time. But for me, the adjustment wasn't hard because I had experienced it in a sense from the inside and saw how it grew and developed and what that meant.
Yeah, I mean, the original intention of not eating meat on Fridays was not meant to just be a rote obligation that you follow blindly for no reason. There had to have been a reason for it, and it was meant to be a spiritual reason. And if that spiritual reason wasn't practical or logistically possible in a country that's impoverished, it does make sense. Like it sounds to me similar to Jesus allowing the disciples to eat the grains, right, when they were hungry, and they were questioning like, why don't you fast? And what did he say? Should the wedding guests fast when the bridegroom is with them? There will be a day when the bridegroom is not with them, and then they will fast. And then he, I think, also used the analogy of the old wine and new wine, the new wine being in old wineskins. And I feel like this transition since Vatican II, which always, I think every council has had post-conciliar chaos. There's been confusion and abuses to that. And I think another pastor one time told me that it takes about 100 years for a council to really get at what it was trying to say. And it might take another 40 or 50 years for people, but yet I think a lot of progress has been made in helping people see the purpose of some of these things that you can choose to live or not, versus things that in some places throughout the world, it's just not even practically possible. And to require that, mandate that in such a way is the moment you break down trust and solidarity.
I would like to just share another.
Oh, Vincent, did you have something?
If that's relevant, go on with that. I wanted to go back to something that you had said a little bit ago, but if you had a response to John, go ahead.
Go for it.
Then. I may be able to work what I had.
Well, so there's when you talked about the news blackout that the council's going on, the Catholic newspapers aren't really reporting much because they don't want to scandalize the faithful, and then the council ends, here are all the changes, and now we're like, okay, this is what we're doing. What did you mean by scandalize the faithful? Was it that there was just?
Oh yeah.
Like, was it just that the newspapers were afraid that the faithful will get really confused by what they were seeing, or by all the back and forth, or what did you mean specifically with that phrase that they didn't want to scandalize the faithful?
Well,
That's a good.
I'll give you another example of part of what I'm referring to, but I believe that I used to, after my work in the bishop's press office, I was able to go to the news conferences they had every day. And there would be reporters from Time Magazine and Life Magazine and other publications, New York, the Washington Post, and what have you. And I could see them wrestling with, and the bishops, while things were in the middle of discussion, did not allow that to be public. They didn't want the articles about, well, you should have heard this bishop from Uganda, the way he scolded this bishop from the Philippines, and it would have gotten blown up, and the church would have
kind of like today with social media.
It would be seen as divisive. So
wow,
it was very simple what was said, but it's very complicated too. I'll give you just one example, two examples.
Give me 1 second. Adjust this.
Okay.
Very good.
Two examples. One of them is when I went to the council, the religion texts that were being used by people like your grandmother were the Baltimore Catechism. And all of a sudden after the council, the catechism's out. And the question is, well, why? Most people didn't get it and couldn't figure it out. And it was hard to even talk about. But the German bishops, when they came to that council, experienced some real sense of, I would say, almost embarrassment, because they knew that some of their young Catholic men had ended up serving Hitler.
Oh, gosh.
And some of them had worked in the concentration camps.
I couldn't imagine.
And these were men who had memorized their catechism well and would go to church on Sunday. And all of a sudden, now they were executing Jews. And their whole thing was, the catechism where you memorize it with the head doesn't work. We need religious formation that deals with the heart, that deals with the spirit, that deals with the intellect, and integrates the two and builds community so that the person would be committed to the values and have internalized the values that they're professing their faith in.
Gosh, that is so true. And the German bishops would have been the ones that would have faced so much. I mean, there has to have been a reason there was so much confusion and pain within their episcopacy, I guess, because of all the horrors that they had to have they would have inherited, from 20 years before, and how so many people during that time would have been still directly affected by the trauma of that time. And of course, they didn't have phrases like PTSD, but I would say that's what it would have been and felt like for many people. Yeah. And so it makes sense that they wouldn't have wanted to scandalize the faithful by having that all over social media. Though, of course, now we have to deal with the fact that people are being constantly scandalized by what they're seeing on social media. But yet, I think that God gave us that counsel for that time to help begin a healing process. I mean, I think it's profound that the very first popes that are elected after Pope Paul VI were from Poland, and then the next one is from Germany. I mean, is that not providence? I mean, you think of John Paul II, then working with Pope Benedict, and there had to have been some kind of public cultural sense that so many people must have felt in their interactions with each other as they, wrote the catechism and all the collaboration that brought all of the resources and encyclicals. And then what Pope Benedict must have said during his papacy. I mean, that to me is a fruit of Vatican II in the sense of the healing from World War II, which was hell in every sense of the word.
Right. And I would, part of also, just to go back to Vatican II again.
Yeah.
Part of the way the Roman Catholic Church was operating before Vatican II, the Pope was definitely the head. The Pope also, for political reasons, way before that, the Civil War in Italy and other things that happened, stayed in the Vatican and did not leave. for about 60 or 70 years. If you wanted to see the Pope, you had to come to Rome. You had to go through all sorts of security stuff, and then you would be allowed to have a meeting with the Pope. And Pope Paul VI wanted to change that. He wanted the Pope to be able to go out and meet people. Well, he made the decision, January the 4th, 1964, that he was going to leave the Vatican. And the furor that caused among many Catholics was unbelievable. He is disgracing the papacy. He's going out with the ordinary people. He is doing things that are hurting the church. Well, we were invited as seminarians, if we wanted to go and sort of wave goodbye to him as he drove out at about 5 o'clock in the morning. It was
You were in Rome at the time.
It was snowy.
That's amazing.
And he was on his way to the airport. And
where did he go?
We waved to him. He went to Israel. And he met with Jewish leaders. He met with Palestinian leaders. And he met with Athenagoras, who was the patriarch of the Orthodox churches. And as they met, they made the decision that they would work together collaboratively. And
had any other pope been to the Holy Lands before?
Not like that, no.
Wow.
And then he came back and he wanted the document on religious liberty passed. It said, we will honor and respect all of the religions of the world. In a sense, he was saying, we are so confident in the love of Jesus in our hearts that we're not afraid to talk to people who don't believe in Jesus. We can get along with them. We can work with them. And he wanted a document approved that was called the Document on Religious Liberty. The number one person who proposed it was Pope John Paul II, became Pope John Paul II. He wanted it because the Russians kept saying that the Catholic Church is not a religious church. It just does religion so it can get political power. And he wanted to cut those ties. And then Paul VI made the decision to go to New York, and he was the first religious leader in the world to address the United Nations. And he opened the door for the person who became Pope John Paul II to travel around the world.
Right. John Paul II visited like 129 countries in 26 years.
And that could not have happened without Vatican II.
Wow. It sounds to me like, especially with the height of the Soviet Union and communism, like that must have been terrifying as well. I mean, this is the Cold War, so there was also that tension in the midst of that, which would have contributed to a lot of the chaos, plus the sexual revolution and the civil rights movement in the United States. I mean, this stuff going on at that time had to have created this sense of we could very well at any moment be on the verge of utter nuclear disaster throughout all the countries of the world. And so that would have created a heightened tension as well. And that yet for the courage of Pope Paul VI to go to Israel of all places, right? To be the first place he visits, and then to address the United Nations, opening the floodgates of a man from Poland, the very country that was under the thumb of the Soviet Union, to then burst open the doors that helped overthrow communism itself within 15 years of that. I mean, that's to me miraculous in a way that helps us now in the church, especially in light of the abuse scandal that hit the United States especially, to begin healing. Because I think I really do believe some of the reasons, some of the fruits from Vatican II have taken so long to really reach the infrastructural change to bring much better and higher standards to religious institutions so that we don't leave the church's teachings behind and forget about reaching people with the love of Christ. I mean, so many places oftentimes teach about Jesus, but they don't teach anyone how to have a relationship with Jesus on a deep level, that so many people left the faith. And yet I believe by knowing this history, Father, it helps us know our story enough to be inspired by those who've gone before us, who had to make courageous decisions in other countries and other cultural situations, so that we in America can not only heal from the sexual abuse scandal that hit the church, that's crippled us with all the litigations and the the infrastructural changes with liability and insurance and legal things, but also the disheartening nature of those things that made maybe a lot of people just drift away, and many didn't know their faith. I do believe the generations that are coming up are being inspired by what you all have done, and who will take it and bring even greater fruit in the United States than we could have ever imagined. Um, I can't even thank you enough for what you have done for the church, Father. Um, any thoughts?
It's been a ministry that was just very exciting, and I said, in a lot of different settings. And the 15 years that I served in the Catholic school office, working with the transition and the religion programs, and working with your grandmother and many other people, was very touching to me. And I'm so grateful that we're settling into some of these things and working with them well. And just as we have our Catholic Education Development Fund or association, I think that these are signs of life that's springing forth.
Yes, I really do. Vincent, do you have any thoughts about all this? It's been a really beautiful 30, 45 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had several questions more regarding the just like what it was like to be there during the council. Like, I'd almost like to, I know we're short on time, but I'd almost like to just do a whole separate thing just talking about the council itself.
Like a whole nother episode?
Yeah, maybe.
We might need to bring
I
you
don't
back,
know,
Father.
just because like, I don't know, you have such a unique perspective on where you were at the time that you were being in Rome during that kind of crucial juncture in the church's history. I'd love to I'd just love to ask a bunch of questions about that. But
One of the other, if you wanted to do that, I would be thrilled. At the same time, one of the other persons you might want in that interview would be Father Roy Stiles. And Father Joe Hayden is not as, hasn't kept up with things. He's worked in South America, but both of them were seated not too far away from Pope John the 23rd at the Mass at which he announced there would be a council.
Wow.
They were students in Rome. And then while they were in Rome, they saw the church getting prepared for the council.
I mean, just hearing that history, I think, would be incredibly helpful for all of us, because so much of our perception of the council comes through sound bites and headlines and perceptions of people that aren't even accurate unless you've lived through it and understand it. I mean, there's some level of perspective that you can share that others can't, and that would be awesome.
Well, I would be honored. It was a blessing. I got called in on 1963, August the 15th, the Feast of the Assumption.
Yeah.
And the offices were closed, but I got called in by Archbishop Flourish to meet with him. I didn't know what was going on. I was afraid I was getting kicked out of the seminary. So I go in and eventually he sees me and he tells me, he said, I just want you to know you're going to get a bill for a boat ticket in the mail tomorrow. I'm sending you to Rome. Well, I wasn't prepared for that.
So you
and
went
so
on.
here I am, a private, asking the 4-star general, do I have to go? One of the other priests who was there said, "I thought you were getting kicked out of the seminary." He said, "I don't think anybody would have done that."
So you
And
took a boat
The
across.
Archbishop looked up at this guy and he looked at the floor and he looked around. He looked at me and he said, "Son, you don't have to go to Rome. You can quit the seminary if you want to."
Okay. Going to
So, it's like, it's just been one thing like that after the other. One of the things that tied up with the council that could be fun talking about is the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh gosh, that was
That's
right
we're
around
doing a
this.
part 2.
Yep, we're doing a
We're doing
part
a
two,
part two.
Father. That's definite. We will schedule that.
Most
sometime.
people don't know the person who resolved the Cuban Missile Crisis was Pope John the 23rd.
I didn't know that.
I did not know that. Well,
Sounds good.
on that
And there's a whole book written
cliffhanger.
on it. A whole book written on it.
Yeah.
I had it. There was a but at the end of my.
Oh, I'm
I'd
sorry.
like to-
Yeah, finish your thought, and then we'll end the episode
Yeah.
today.
Oh,
So-
you mean you're still listening to what I'm saying?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
this is amazing.
So
Well, we're not
we-
done yet. Hang on.
I know. It's also like before the recording of this episode, we were talking about,
The history of the standards for lay ministry and
mhm, like lay ministry and catechesis and that sort of thing, and I just wanted to. This is kind of a half-baked question, so pardon me, but where do you see? So there's been a little bit of a shift, I think, in recent years where a lot of people are learning their faith online.
yeah, YouTube, things like that.
So, and this was actually a big chunk of my story. Like, I, had a, bit of a reversion in college, and I learned about the faith from, like, YouTube of all places, and so, Catholic Answers and that sort of thing. Matt Fradd's YouTube channel, Pints with Aquinas, and
Father Mike Schmitz.
Father Mike Schmitz. And so where do you see, and what we're doing on Spirit Inspire? So Father, do you see that as an outgrowth of the increased like lay participation, in faith formation? Do you see it as, does that question make sense? That wasn't really a logical question.
Right? Do you see it as a fruit of these efforts on many levels
There you go. Thank you.
to raise up lay people for the kinds of things that you're seeing online, even?
Well, I think we're just, culturally, we're going through such a huge shift. I have no sense of where things are going. But when you got kids who are watching or on their computer and on different programs and playing different games and things like that, and periodically they know that they have to stop and go downstairs and join the family to get a meal, but they're almost like race car drivers who are pulling in to get gasoline and oil changes so they can get back to their computer.
Yeah.
The whole sense of family is so different
Mm-hmm.
than what it was. And I believe an awful lot of the tensions that we're experiencing, especially young people with suicidal ideation and all sorts of other things, mean we're moving into a whole new age. And it can't happen if the laity aren't ministering. And Pope John Paul's document on the laity, he had a vision that was Pope John Paul II. His vision was beyond
Where the church was.
where we are today, even
Yeah.
that
Christie's
the world will be
Daily Laity.
transformed by lay people. And the job of the priest is to minister to the laity so that they can bring ministry and values into their workplace and into their social settings and transform the world. And then I think Pope Francis has added to that very strongly with this whole synodal process.
Yeah.
The Catholic Church is the largest international institution on the face of the earth. We've got divisions and wars going on everywhere right now. And people have to learn how to talk to each other and be with each other. And it's his belief that if we don't become the church that can help people to learn how to listen to each other, learn from each other, talk with each other, resolve conflicts, love each other, the world's going to be a disaster.
I think the best thing to sum up Vatican II is something I heard from Bishop Robert Barron. He said, Vatican II was not about modernizing the church. It was about teaching people in the modern world how to Christify the world.
Bishop Barron has got some marvelous things.
Gosh, it's like that's what it is. And people, I think, missed it somehow. And I think we're getting it back. And praise the Lord for that. So.
Yeah, well, I don't think it was missed, but...
No, you're right. It wasn't missed by many. I'm talking about the people who left the faith and didn't know the faith.
Right. And 50% of our people today, under the age of 25, Catholics are Spanish-speaking.
I know.
It's a whole changing church.
Yeah.
And we're all in the middle of that. And I just think the thing that Vatican II taught was they listened to each other from different cultural backgrounds, and they learned how to think together and work together and try to build a world of peace that is filled with love for Christ and the gospel. And I just think that the journey continues.
It does. With that, everyone, God bless you all. Pray for us. We'll be praying for you, and we'll see you on another episode of Spirit and Spire.
Thank you.